A small convenience store in a rainy city evening. The light flickers above the counter. A frail paralyzed girl in a wheelchair clutches a small chocolate bar, her hands trembling. The cashier's harsh voice slices through the quiet store. "Hey! What are you hiding in your bag? You think you can steal and roll away, huh?" Everyone turns, eyes full of judgment. The girl's lips tremble. She tries to speak but stammers. Her old wheelchair squeaks. People whisper cruel things. These people always beg and steal. A few coins fall from her lap, rolling across the floor. Proof she was going to pay. But no one notices. The manager calls for security. The girl starts crying silently, her tears mixing with the rain dripping from the roof. And that's when a man, a single father with tired eyes and a delivery uniform soaked from the rain, steps forward. He's holding a small lunchbox, clearly for his little daughter waiting at home. He hesitates, but something inside him won't let him stay quiet. He takes a deep breath and says firmly, "She didn't steal anything. I saw her trying to pay." The room goes silent. Everyone stares at him. A poor delivery man daring to defend someone beneath him. It was one of those evenings when the rain doesn't just fall. It whispers stories of loneliness against the glass. The streets shimmered under the orange glow of flickering lamps, and inside a small convenience store at the corner of Maple and 7th, the world felt smaller than ever. The bell above the door chimed softly as people hurried in and out, shaking umbrellas, rushing home from work. But in the middle of all that motion, one fragile figure sat still, a girl in a worn-out wheelchair, her hands trembling as she reached for a small bar of chocolate from the lower shelf. Her fingers were thin, pale, and uncertain, like someone too used to being afraid of taking up space. She placed it gently in her lap, looked around nervously, and wheeled herself toward the counter. The cashier, a man with a stern face and tired eyes, barely looked up from his phone. The sound of rain outside mixed with the hum of the old refrigerator. The girl's lips moved, but her voice came out broken. A stammer more than words. "PP, please this one," she whispered, trying to reach for her small cloth purse. But her grip slipped, and the purse fell open on the counter. A few coins rolled out, clinking and scattering across the floor. She gasped softly and tried to reach them, but her wheelchair didn't let her bend far enough. She looked helplessly toward the ground, her face coloring with shame. That's when the cashier's tone changed. Sharp, suspicious, cutting through the air like a blade. "Hey, what are you doing? Trying to pull something, huh?" His voice carried across the store, loud enough for everyone to turn. A middle-aged woman near the magazine rack frowned, whispering something to her friend. A man at the back snorted, shaking his head as if the scene confirmed every ugly stereotype he'd ever believed. The cashier stepped closer, arms crossed. "You think because you're in that chair people won't notice? Show me what's in your bag." The girl froze. Her lips trembled, her eyes wide with fear. "I didn't," she tried to say, but her voice broke before the words could form. Her hand shook as she held out the small purse again, desperate to prove her innocence. The chocolate still sat in her lap, untouched, as if even gravity had decided not to take sides. But no one cared to see that. The store manager, an impatient man with a name tag that read Rick, came storming out from the back. "What's going on here?" The cashier pointed. "Caught her trying to steal this." Rick sighed dramatically, muttering, "Figures. Happens all the time. People like her always pull the pity act." The words sliced through the girl like glass. Her shoulders sank, her eyes glistened. She looked around, at the faces staring at her, the judgment, the disgust, and for a second, she looked as though she wished she could vanish right there, melt into the rain outside. The bell above the door jingled as another customer walked in. A tall man in a faded blue delivery uniform, rain dripping from his hair, holding a paper bag close to his chest. He noticed the tension instantly. He paused, watching the scene unfold. He could have kept walking, just like everyone else. He had no reason to stop. His daughter was waiting for him at home. Probably hungry, probably asking when he'd be back. But something about the way the girl's hands trembled, the way her tears mixed with the rainwater on her cheeks, pulled at a thread deep inside him. He knew that look. He'd seen it once before. In the mirror, the night his wife died, when he had to tell his little girl that Mama wasn't coming back. That same look of helplessness, of being judged by a world that doesn't stop to understand. He set his paper bag down on the counter and spoke quietly but firmly. She didn't steal anything. The whole room seemed to pause. Rick turned toward him, annoyed. "Excuse me." The man, still dripping rain, met his gaze. "I saw her when I came in. She was trying to pay." The coins fell. He bent down, picked up 2 of the coins from the floor, and placed them gently in front of the girl. "These belong to her." Rick laughed dryly. "Oh, you saw it, did you? Maybe you're both working together. You people always." He stopped mid-sentence when the man's eyes hardened. Not in anger, but in quiet disappointment, the kind that makes others feel small. "You people?" The man repeated, voice steady. "You mean the ones who still believe in decency?" His words hung in the air, heavy and calm. The murmurs in the store died down. The woman by the magazine rack lowered her eyes. The cashier looked uncertain now, his bravado fading. The man crouched slightly, turning to the girl. "It's okay," he said softly. "You didn't do anything wrong." She tried to speak, but emotion choked her words. He picked up the chocolate from her lap, placed a few bills on the counter, and said, "Here. Keep the change." Then he turned to Rick and added, "No one should cry for something this small." For a moment, even the rain outside seemed to quiet. The girl looked at him, as though he had just lifted the weight of the world off her shoulders. Her eyes shimmered, not just from gratitude, but from disbelief that someone had finally seen her, not her wheelchair. She whispered a shaky, "Thank you," clutching the chocolate like it was a symbol of something far bigger than candy. Dignity, maybe, or kindness. The manager grumbled under his breath, muttering something about charity cases. But even he couldn't quite meet the man's eyes anymore. The stranger, the single father, picked up his paper bag again, nodded politely, and began walking toward the door. But before he could leave, the girl called out, her voice trembling but clear, "Mister, why did you help me?" He paused, one hand on the door handle, his reflection caught in the glass against the storm outside. For a long second, he didn't answer. Then he looked back at her and said simply, "Because once, someone helped me when nobody else did." He smiled faintly and stepped into the rain, disappearing into the night. The door closed behind him, the bell chiming one last time, leaving the store in an uneasy silence. Rick shifted awkwardly, the cashier avoided eye contact, and the other customers suddenly found reasons to leave. The girl looked down at the chocolate in her lap, tears still glistening, but her lips curved into the faintest smile. The kind born not from happiness, but from relief that kindness hadn't gone extinct after all. Outside, the man walked under the dim streetlights, his shoes splashing through puddles, his thoughts heavy but peaceful. He didn't know who she was or what her story might be. He only knew that, tonight, doing what was right felt like breathing again. And though the rain kept falling, he didn't raise his umbrella. He let it wash over him, like forgiveness, like freedom, like the world reminding him that even in its cruelty, there are still moments that prove humanity hasn't completely forgotten how to care. Sometimes, the smallest act of courage becomes the loudest voice in a silent world. They say some heroes don't wear capes, they just show up when the world turns its back. Armin never thought of himself as one. He wasn't strong in the way stories usually define strength, nor brave in the way movies show courage. He was just a man trying to survive, carrying quiet scars no one saw. Every morning before dawn, he tied his worn shoes, kissed his little daughter's forehead, and whispered, "I'll be back before bedtime," even though he knew he probably wouldn't. His delivery job didn't leave him much time for promises. But he still made them. Because she deserved to believe in something steady, even if he wasn't sure the world had much steadiness left. That night, after he helped the girl in the store, Armin walked home through the rain, his heart heavier than the soaked uniform clinging to his skin. He wasn't thinking about what he'd done or what anyone might say. He was thinking about his daughter, Lena, 6 years old, bright as sunlight, always waiting by the window for the sound of his motorbike. She'd draw hearts on foggy glass whenever it rained, believing each drop was a wish from heaven. And Armin, despite his exhaustion, would smile because she made him believe those little things mattered. When he opened the door that night, she was asleep on the couch, a blanket half slipping off, the TV still flickering faintly. He placed the paper bag of food on the table, turned off the lights, and just stood there for a moment, watching her chest rise and fall. The room smelled of soap and simplicity. He didn't own much, but everything he had, he earned with hands that never stopped working. He sat beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I met someone today," he murmured softly, more to himself than to her. "Someone who reminded me of us." He thought about the girl in the wheelchair. The way her eyes darted, the way her hands shook. That fear of being unseen, unheard, unwanted. It was something he knew too well. After his wife passed, life became a constant balancing act between holding on and letting go. Bills stacked up. Friends drifted away. People looked at him with sympathy, which, over time, felt worse than pity. It was as if they were saying, "You're broken, but we'll pretend we don't see it." So he learned to smile just enough to keep people comfortable. But inside, he carried storms no one asked about. He remembered the day Lina asked, "Papa, why don't we ever go to the big store?" And he had to tell her, "Because the small one has better bread." The truth was, the big store had things he couldn't afford, and walking through aisles of what he couldn't give her hurt more than hunger itself. Yet that night, standing up for the girl, he'd felt something he hadn't felt in years. A pulse of quiet defiance, a reminder that decency costs nothing, even when everything else does. The next morning, Armin's alarm rang at 5. The city was still half asleep, streetlights dimming as dawn stretched over the rooftops. He poured himself a cup of cheap instant coffee, watched the steam curl in the air, and thought again about that moment. The trembling girl, the way the store went silent, how no one had spoken up until he did. It wasn't pride that stirred in him. It was a kind of ache. He wondered how many times he'd been one of the silent ones before. How many times he'd turned away because he was too tired, too busy, too afraid of being noticed for the wrong reasons. At work, his coworkers joked around like always. Light banter over heavy boxes, laughter covering the fatigue. But when the rain started again that afternoon, Armin caught himself staring out the warehouse window thinking of her. He didn't know her name then, didn't know where she came from or where she'd gone. But he couldn't shake the feeling that she carried a story no one cared to hear. And something inside him whispered that maybe helping her wasn't a coincidence at all. Maybe it was life's quiet way of reminding him that kindness doesn't end at sympathy. It begins at understanding. That evening, after another long shift, Armin stopped by the same store again. The manager wasn't there. The cashier recognized him but avoided eye contact, shame hanging between them like unspoken smoke. Armin didn't say anything either. He just bought milk and bread, nodded and left. As he stepped outside, he saw an old man struggling to carry groceries across the puddled sidewalk. Without thinking, Armin hurried over, took the heavier bag, and helped him to the bus stop. The man thanked him, smiling faintly. "Not many people stop these days," he said. Armin just smiled back. Maybe they forget what it feels like to need help. As he walked home, those words lingered. Maybe that's all it was. People forgetting. Forgetting that kindness doesn't make you weak, that stepping up for someone doesn't mean stepping down from dignity. In a world that rewards indifference, he realized, being kind had become a quiet form of rebellion. When he reached home, Lena ran to him, barefoot laughing. She held up a drawing, stick figures under a big blue sky. "This is us, Papa, and that's Mama in heaven." He crouched down, his throat tightening. "She looks happy," he whispered. Lena nodded, "because she can see us smiling." Armin pulled her into a hug, eyes glistening. "Then let's keep smiling for her," he said. That night, after putting her to bed, he sat by the window. The city lights blinked in the distance like tired stars. He thought about how fragile people are, how easy it is to misjudge, how quickly the world points fingers at the weak. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, whether he'd see that girl again, whether life would get easier. But he knew one thing: if decency could still exist in a stranger's heart, then maybe hope hadn't left the world yet. He leaned back in his chair, listening to the rain start again, gentle this time. The rhythm reminded him of his late wife's voice, the way she used to hum lullabies when Lena couldn't sleep. He remembered her once saying, "Armin, don't let life make you hard. The world needs soft hearts that refuse to break." He hadn't understood it then. But now he did. Soft hearts don't mean weak hearts. They mean those who bleed, but still reach out to heal. He smiled faintly, whispering to the silence, "I'm trying, love. I'm trying." And somewhere deep inside, the memory of that frightened girl turned into something more. A reminder that courage isn't loud, it's quiet. It's not about fighting back. It's about standing up when no one else will. It's the kind of courage that doesn't ask for attention, but changes the air around it anyway. And so, when the world seemed heavy and unfair, Armin found his strength not in what he had, but in what he refused to lose: his humanity. Because sometimes, the strongest people are the ones who stay kind. You know, sometimes two broken souls cross paths in the most ordinary places, not because they're meant to fix each other, but because they're meant to remind each other that they're not alone in their pain. For Armin, that realization came the next afternoon. He was returning from another delivery shift, his shoulders sore, his hands rough from hours of carrying boxes through the city's endless noise. The rain had cleared, leaving the streets painted in silver puddles, but his thoughts were still heavy with last night's memory. That girl in the wheelchair, her trembling voice, the injustice that made his blood stir. He hadn't been able to shake her from his mind. There was something hauntingly familiar about her silence, the kind that doesn't just come from fear, but from being forgotten. When he saw her again, it wasn't in a store or on a street corner. She was by the park bench near the old willow tree, the one that overlooked the small pond. The same chocolate wrapper lay beside her. Unopened, her head was lowered, her hair falling over her face, her hands gripping the wheel of her chair, as if she were holding on to the last thing that gave her control. Armin hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should approach. But then he thought of his daughter, of how he'd want someone to treat her if she were ever alone like that. So he walked over, his steps soft against the damp ground, and said gently, "Hey, you didn't eat it?" She looked up, startled, her eyes wide with confusion before recognition softened her features. "You're the man from the store," she said, her voice still fragile. He nodded, offering a kind smile. "I figured I might find you here. You looked like someone who needed some fresh air more than walls." He sat down on the bench beside her, close enough to be there, but far enough to give her space. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was the kind that fills the air when words aren't enough. Eventually, she said quietly, "I didn't steal it. I swear." Armin turned his head slightly toward her, nodding. "I know. You didn't have to prove that to me." Her eyes glistened. "People never believe me. They see the chair, and they think I'm just some burden. Or a liar trying to get sympathy." He sighed, looking down at his hands. "People see what they want to see. Sometimes it's easier for them to believe the worst. That way they don't have to feel guilty about ignoring the truth." He smiled faintly, then added, "I've seen that look before. I've lived it." Her brows furrowed. "You." He chuckled softly, shaking his head. Yeah. I've been called a lot of things: lazy, desperate, unlucky. People love to judge what they don't understand. They never see the nights you stay awake wondering how to keep everything from falling apart. That's when she turned her head to him for the first time, studying his face like she was trying to read his story through the lines near his eyes. "You have a daughter, don't you?" she asked suddenly. He blinked, surprised. "How'd you know?" She smiled weakly. "The way you talked to me yesterday. Gentle. Like someone who knows how to calm a scared child." He looked away, hiding the emotion flickering in his eyes. "Yeah, her name's Lena. She's 6. The best thing that ever happened to me. And the hardest reason to keep fighting some days." His voice trembled just enough to reveal how much it cost him to say that. "Lost her mother 3 years ago. Car accident. Since then, it's just been us." The girl's hands tightened around her lap, her voice dropping to a whisper. "My mother too. Same way. I was in the car with her." She paused, swallowing hard. "I woke up in a hospital. Couldn't move my legs anymore. My father, he couldn't handle it. He sent me to stay with someone else for a while, but they—" Her voice cracked. "They left me." Armin froze, the weight of her confession pressing into his chest like a stone. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. The breeze rustled the leaves, carrying the faint sound of distant laughter. Children playing somewhere nearby. It felt cruelly out of place. He looked at her, seeing not just a girl, but a reflection of every quiet hurt he'd buried inside. He didn't see a stranger anymore. He saw loss. He saw loneliness. He saw himself. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and said softly, "You know, people think pain makes us weaker. But sometimes it's what teaches us to see others. To really see them." She nodded slowly, tears forming in her eyes. "It's just hard. Some days I feel invisible. Like I could disappear and no one would notice." His voice grew gentle, almost a whisper. "I'd notice." She looked at him, startled again, but this time not from fear. From the sincerity in his tone. He smiled sadly. "You don't know how many times I've felt that way too. Standing in a crowd, working a job where no one even remembers your name. You start to wonder if you even matter anymore. But then someone like you shows up. Someone who reminds you that being seen isn't about being noticed. It's about being understood." The wind carried the sound of rustling leaves again. As if nature itself was listening, the girl reached into her lap and unwrapped the chocolate bar. She broke it in half and held one piece out to him. "Thank you," she said softly. "For standing up for me. For sitting here now." He took it smiling. "Guess we both needed a little sweetness today." They ate in silence for a while, watching the pond ripple with raindrops. Armin thought about how strange life was. How pain could weave two strangers together in the simplest of moments. He thought about his daughter's laugh, his wife's voice, the emptiness that still lived in their absence. But for the first time in years, the ache didn't feel quite as hollow. It felt shared. As the light began to fade, he stood and gently said, "You should get somewhere dry before it gets dark." She looked hesitant. "I don't really have anywhere." His chest tightened again, but he masked it with a soft nod. "Then let's find you one." As he pushed her wheelchair toward the shelter at the end of the park, they talked. Not about their pain anymore, but about little things. She asked about his daughter's favorite cartoons. He asked if she liked the rain. She said yes, because it made the world quiet enough to think. He said he liked it too, because it washed the city clean, even if only for a moment. When they reached the small shelter, she turned to him and said, "You know what's strange? I don't even know your name." He smiled. "Armin, Armin." She repeated softly, like she was trying to remember it for later. "I'm Sarah." He nodded, feeling that name settle into his memory. Before he could leave, she said, "You made me feel human again today." The words hit him harder than she could have known. He managed a small smile, his throat tight. "And you reminded me what that really means." Sometimes it only takes one shared scar to make two souls understand each other. Because pain, when met with kindness, doesn't just heal, it connects. Life has a strange way of revealing truth when we least expect it, quietly, suddenly, and often when our hearts are least prepared. For Armin, it happened just as the world seemed to be calming down around him. After that day in the park, he found himself thinking about Sarah more often than he wanted to admit. Maybe it was because her story mirrored parts of his own. Maybe it was because, for the first time in a long time, he felt like he'd met someone who truly understood what loneliness looked like up close. Every evening after work he'd stop by the park, just to check if she was there. Sometimes she was, sometimes she wasn't. But when she was, they'd talk. About everything and nothing at all. And in those quiet exchanges, two broken worlds started to mend at the edges. Days turned into a week, and a strange rhythm began to form between them. He'd bring her tea from a roadside stall, and steaming in paper cups, and she'd wait under that old willow tree, smiling like she'd been waiting all day just for that warmth. He didn't ask too many questions about her past. He didn't want to dig into her pain. All he knew was that her caretaker had abandoned her, and that she'd been trying to survive on her own ever since. The city could be merciless to those who couldn't stand on their own feet. And yet, there she was, sitting tall in her chair, teaching him resilience without even meaning to. One afternoon, the rain had stopped but the clouds still hung low, heavy with the promise of more. Armin was late. A delivery truck had broken down on his route. By the time he reached the park, the streets were half empty, and the faint sound of thunder rolled in the distance. He spotted her instantly. Alone by the same bench, clutching her scarf as the wind tugged at it. He rushed over. "You should have gone somewhere safe," he said softly, placing the extra jacket he carried around her shoulders. She smiled faintly, her voice barely above the wind. "I didn't want to miss your tea." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You shouldn't wait in this weather." "Waiting makes the tea taste better," she replied. There was something about the way she said it, simple, innocent, and yet layered with meaning. They sat there for a while, sipping from steaming cups, the rain beginning to drizzle again. That's when the distant hum of an engine grew louder, and a sleek black car pulled up near the park's entrance. Its headlights sliced through the dimness, scattering reflections across the wet ground. Armin didn't think much of it until he saw the man step out, tall, sharply dressed, with an urgency in his movements that cut through the calm. Two men followed behind him, scanning the park. Sarah's cup slipped from her hands, hitting the ground with a soft thud. "Sarah?" Armin asked, concerned. But her face had gone pale. Her lips trembled, eyes wide. She looked like she was seeing a ghost. One of the men called out, his voice cracking with desperation. "Sarah! Sarah!" The man in the suit turned sharply toward the sound, and in that moment, every piece of the puzzle that Armin hadn't even realized existed began to fall into place. The suited man ran forward, calling again. "My God, it's her!" He dropped to his knees in front of her, taking her hands in his. "Sarah, sweetheart, I've been looking for you everywhere." Armin froze. His mind raced, trying to process what was happening. Sarah's voice trembled as she whispered, "Dad." And in that one word, the world seemed to stand still. Her father, the man she thought had given up on her, was right there, drenched from the rain, eyes red with sleeplessness and relief. He hugged her, whispering, "I thought I lost you forever." Armin stepped back quietly, unsure if he even belonged in that moment. The truth hit him like a slow wave. The girl he'd defended, the one people had accused of stealing, the one he'd shared tea and silence with. She wasn't abandoned. She wasn't homeless. She was the daughter of a man whose face looked like it belonged on billboards. A man of wealth, of influence, of everything Armin's life had never known. The security guards moved closer, shielding them from the light drizzle. The air buzzed with urgency. Phones ringing, people talking, cars idling. Sarah's father turned to Armin then, his expression full of confusion at first, then gratitude. "Were you the one who found her?" Armin hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I just saw her in the park a few days ago. She needed help, that's all." The man stood up, his voice breaking. "Help? You don't know what you've done. She went missing 3 months ago. Her caretaker disappeared. We searched every hospital, every shelter. I thought." His voice cracked again. He stopped, unable to finish. Sarah looked at Armin, tears streaming down her face, her lips forming a shaky smile. "I told you, Armin, people don't always see what's in front of them. But you did." The rain began to fall harder now, the sound mixing with the murmurs around